guys, I am so excited to review Team of Rivals with you. This is by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and I love everything about this book. It talks about Lincoln's character and how he was able to gather his former rivals to work together in his cabinet, and just so many different things about his personal life and the lives of those around him and how they completely changed the course of history. But I like to take lots of notes. You can see in the beginning of my book, I think I did 5 pages of notes. This book has so many good things in it. And I wanted to share 12 passages with you that I absolutely loved and wanted to share with the world to encourage more people to read this book. So the first section I wanted to read, if you have this book, I'm going to share the page number so you can read along and look at it with me. But the first passage I wanted to read is on page 6. This is a very personal description of Lincoln that I really liked. Lincoln's shock of black hair, brown furrowed face, and deep-set eyes made him look older than his 51 years. He was a familiar figure to almost everyone in Springfield, as was his singular way of walking, which gave the impression that his long, gaunt frame needed oiling. He plodded forward in an awkward manner, hands hanging at his sides or folded behind his back. His step had no spring, his partner William Herndon recalled. He lifted his whole foot at once, rather than lifting from the toes, and then thrust the whole foot down on the ground, rather than landing on his heel. His legs, another observer noted, seemed to drag from the knees down, like those of a laborer going home after a hard day's work. His features, even supporters conceded, were not such as belonged to a handsome man. In repose, his face was so overspread with sadness. The reporter Horace White noted that it seemed as if Shakespeare's melancholy Jacques had been translated from the forest of Arden to the capital of Illinois. Yet when Lincoln began to speak, White observed, this expression of sorrow dropped from him instantly. His face lighted up with a winning smile, and where I had a moment before seen only leaden sorrow, I now beheld keen intelligence, genuine kindness of heart, and the promise of true friendship. If his appearance seemed somewhat odd, what captivated Myers, another contemporary, observed was his winning manner, his good humor, and his unaffected kindness and gentleness. 5 minutes in his presence, and you cease to think that he is either homely or awkward. This is one of the reasons I really love Lincoln, and I want to meet him. I want to talk to him and hear his stories. He was such a great storyteller, and he had an anecdote and something to share to teach a lesson with literally every topic you could possibly think of. The second passage is on page 102. Some students of Lincoln have suggested that he suffered from chronic depression. One confusion in making this designation is the interchangeable uses of the terms sadness, melancholy, and depression. To be sure, Lincoln was a melancholy man. His melancholy dripped from him as he walked, said his law partner William Herndon, an observation echoed by dozens of people. No element of Mr. Lincoln's character was so marked, obvious, and ingrained as his mysterious and profound melancholy, recalled Henry Whitney. This melancholy was stamped on him while in the period of his gestation. It was part of his nature and could no more be shaken off than he could part with his brains. At times, Lincoln's melancholy signaled a withdrawal to the solitude of thought. As a child, he would retreat from others to read. In later life, he would work a problem through in private, whether a proof of Euclidean geometry or the meaning of the Declaration of Independence. Only when he had resolved the problems and issues in his own mind did he display the results of his private meditations. It is little wonder that others saw those withdrawals as evidence of melancholy. Furthermore, the very contours of Lincoln's face in repose lent him a sorrowful aspect. One observer remarked that his face was about the saddest I ever looked upon. Another contemporary described his face as slightly wrinkled about the brows, but not from trouble. It was intense, constant thought that planted the wrinkles there. Unlike depression, melancholy does not have a specific cause. It is an aspect of temperament, perhaps genetically based. One may emerge from the hypo, as Lincoln did, but melancholy is an indelible part of one's nature. Lincoln understood this. A tendency to melancholy he told Joshua's sister Mary, is a misfortune, not a fault. The reason I liked this passage is because it shows that Lincoln, his face just looked sad. He looked like he was sad all the time. But he found humor and he found stories and different things all around him to be able to bring his sadness up, and he was able to overcome that melancholy. And anybody who was with him for just even a few minutes and heard his stories was brought up, and they felt better after talking to him. The third passage is on page, let's see, it starts on 279. So this is right after he's been elected and he's going to be forming his cabinet. It says, by the time Lincoln got to bed, it was 2:00. He was exhausted but could not sleep. The excitement which had kept him up through the campaign had passed away. He later recalled to Gideon Welles, and he was oppressed with the load of responsibility that was upon him. Outside his windows, he could hear the citizens of Springfield partying in the streets, laughing, singing, and marching until they could carry on no longer. With the arrival of dawn, they finally dispersed to their homes. So they partied all night. They were so excited that Lincoln was elected as the president. Undoubtedly, Lincoln shared the elation of his neighbors. From his earliest days in politics, he had craved the opportunity to accomplish important deeds that would benefit his fellows. In modern parlance, he wanted to make a difference, and now he had the opportunity to do so. Yet, keenly aware of both the fractious nature of the youthful Republican Party and the ominous threats from the South, he understood that his country was entering a most perilous time. Lincoln literally became president in the middle of complete chaos. They knew that the Civil War was coming, and he entered his presidency knowing that and wanting to make a huge difference and being able to fix, and bring our country together. In addition to that section, I wanted to read right after he was elected, he was getting together his cabinet. And it says, returning home, Lincoln corresponded with a wide range of politicians and listened carefully to their suggestions for his cabinet. In the end, however, he alone would solve what Nicolay's daughter, Helen, later described as an intensified crossword puzzle, in which party loyalty and service, personal fitness, geographical location, and a dozen other factors have to be taken into account and made to harmonize. So the biggest premise of this book, why it's called Team of Rivals, is Lincoln actually gathered together people into his cabinet who were previously rivals of his, men who had shunned him or made him look really silly while he was working as a lawyer. Lots of different situations, but he literally gathered together people who had previously been his enemy, basically, and had them work together. So this crossword puzzle she's talking about is literally fitting together all these different personalities to make a cabinet work for a united union. The fourth passage that I would like to share is on page 456. This is actually about Mary. After the passing of their son, Willie, she was so depressed. She had just such a hard time overcoming the death of her son. And one of the things that brought her peace was going to the hospitals and serving the soldiers. So on page 456, it says, it was during this restorative summer that Mary formed what one newspaper termed a daily habit of visiting the hospitals in the district. The hospitals became her refuge, allowing for a few hours of reprieve from her private grief. But for these humane employments, a friend who often accompanied her to the hospital wards recalled her saying her heart would have broken when she lost her child. It is clear in the recollections of Walt Whitman, who worked as a nurse in the hospital wards, that the harrowing experience made one's little cares and difficulties disappear into nothing. After ministering each day to the hundreds of young men who had endured ghastly wounds, submitted to amputations without anesthesia, and often died without the comfort of family or friends, Whitman wrote, nothing of ordinary misfortune seems as it used to. The reason I wanted to share this passage is because it is so important that we have empathy and try to look at the lives of others. Anytime you're in the service of another person, you actually forget your own trials. And Mary, while she was at her very, very lowest and so depressed from the passing of their son, Willie, she found refuge in talking to the soldiers and serving them and forgot the pain that she had with the passing of her son. And in all of the craziness and things in this world, the best thing that we can do right now is to serve and love each other and try to make our own little corner better in serving and loving the people around us. The fifth passage is on page 546. While the heat enervated most of official Washington, Lincoln thrived on the long days, the relative freedom from office seekers, and the lack of family interference with his work. The tycoon is in fine whack, John Hay reported on August 7th. I have rarely seen him more serene and busy. He is managing this war, the draft, foreign relations, and planning a reconstruction of the Union all at once. I never knew with what tyrannous authority he rules the cabinet till now. The most important things he decides, and there is no cavil. I am growing more and more firmly convinced that the good of the country absolutely demands that he should be kept where he is till this thing is over. There is no man in the country so wise, so gentle, and so firm. I believe the hand of God placed him where he is. I love reading passages like this because it shows that there was so much more at work with preparing Lincoln for the position of being president. And all of the people around him, especially in his really close circle, recognized that Providence truly had prepared him and put him in place to be president, to be the one person who could unite the United States and bring us back together again after such a terrible civil war. The next section is on page 631. And this says, acutely aware of his own emotional needs, Lincoln had chosen exactly the right time to review the troops, for his conversations with Grant and his interactions with the soldiers sustained and inspired him during the troubling days ahead. Having hope, writes Daniel Goleman in his study of emotional intelligence, means that one will not give in to overwhelming anxiety, a defeatist attitude, or depression in the face of difficult challenges or setbacks. Hope is more than the sunny view that everything will turn out all right. It is believing you have the will and the way to accomplish your goals. More clearly than his colleagues, Lincoln understood that numerous setbacks were inevitable before the war could be brought to a close. Yet in the end, he firmly believed the North would prevail. We are today further ahead than I thought 1.5 years ago we should be, he told Noah Brooks that June. And yet there are plenty of people who believe that the war is about to be substantially closed. As God is my judge, I shall be satisfied if we are over with the fight in Virginia within a year. The reason I wanted to share this is because Lincoln actually went and visited the soldiers as often as he possibly could. He tried to rally them and get them excited and continued to buoy them up. And it was that hope and that faith that he had that the North would prevail and the Civil War would be able to come to a close with defeating slavery and getting rid of it, that he was able to keep this hope and then share it with basically everybody around him. When other people were faltering, he stood and he kept that faith that they would prevail and that the war would be won. The seventh passage is on page 698, and it reads, if the spirited crowd expected a speech exalting recent Union victories, they were disappointed. This is the speech after he was reelected. In keeping with his lifelong tendency to consider all sides of a troubled situation, Lincoln urged a more sympathetic understanding of the nation's alienated citizens in the South. There were no unbridgeable differences, he insisted. We read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. It may seem strange that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not, that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. In his Springfield speech a decade earlier, Lincoln had maintained that he could not condemn the South for an inability to end slavery when he himself knew of no easy solution. Now the president suggested that God had given to both North and South this terrible war as punishment for their shared sin of slavery. Speaking with the eloquence of the prophets, he continued, "Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with the sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether." Drawing upon the rare wisdom of a temperament that consistently displayed uncommon magnanimity toward those who opposed him, he then issued his historic plea to his fellow countrymen. "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." Lincoln, with the war coming to a close, he did not want any retribution or retaliation for the South. He just wanted those soldiers to go home and go back to their farms and their shops, and for the Union to literally be united and not cause any more destruction. And in this speech, when he was elected for his second term, that's exactly what he wanted to share with everyone. He wanted everybody to know we need to come together, we need to literally be united, and we need to have peace as a common goal so that we can come back together after being so broken and so divided for so long. The 8th passage is on page 701. Praise for this, so this is talking about the speech that he gave. Praise for the speech mingled with praise for Lincoln himself. The Spectator suggested that it was divine inspiration or providence that brought the Republican convention in 1860 to choose Lincoln, the village lawyer, over Seward. Congressman Isaac Arnold overheard a conversation between a celebrated minister and an unidentified New York statesman, who one historian suggests was likely William Henry Seward himself. "The president's inaugural is the finest state paper in all history," the minister declared. "Yes," the New Yorker answered, "and as Washington's name grows brighter with time, so it will be with Lincoln's. A century from today, that inaugural will be read as one of the most sublime utterances ever spoken by man. Washington is the great man of the era of the Revolution. So will Lincoln be of this, but Lincoln will reach the higher position in history." This passage I just loved because it shows Lincoln truly was prepared to be the president. There were so many factors that were determining how he would become the president, but God definitely had his hand in helping Lincoln to become the president. The 9th passage is on page 713. The next morning, March 28th, Sherman and Grant, accompanied this time by Admiral Porter, returned to the River Queen for a long talk with Lincoln in the upper saloon. With the war drawing to a close, Sherman inquired of Lincoln what was to be done with the rebel armies when defeated, and what should be done with the political leaders such as Jeff Davis, etc. Lincoln replied that all he wanted of us was to defeat the opposing armies and to get the men composing the Confederate armies back to their homes, at work on their farms, and in their shops. He wanted no retaliation or retribution. Let them have their horses to plow with, and if you like, their guns to shoot crows with. I want no one punished. Treat them liberally all round. We want those people to return to their allegiance to the Union and submit to the laws. Regarding Jefferson Davis and his top political leaders, Lincoln privately wished they could somehow escape the country, though he could not say this in public. As usual, Sherman recalled he illustrated his meaning by a story. A man once had taken the total abstinence pledge. When visiting a friend, he was invited to take a drink, but declined on the score of his pledge. When his friend suggested lemonade, the man accepted. In preparing the lemonade, the friend pointed to the brandy bottle and said the lemonade would be more palatable if he were to pour in a little brandy, when his guest said if he could do so unbeknown to him, he would not object. Sherman grasped the point immediately. Mr. Lincoln wanted Davis to escape, unbeknown to him. Late that afternoon, Sherman left City Point to return to his troops and prepare for the expected battle. Saying goodbye to the president, he was more than ever impressed by his kindly nature, his deep and earnest sympathy with the afflictions of the whole people, and his absolute faith in the courage, manliness, and integrity of the armies in the field. To be sure, his face was careworn and haggard, but the moment he began to talk, his face lightened up, his tall form, as it were, unfolded, and he was the very impersonation of good humor and fellowship. A decade later, Sherman remained convinced of Lincoln's unparalleled leadership. Of all the men I ever met, he seemed to possess more of the elements of greatness, combined with goodness, than any other. That passage I really love because it shows Lincoln really wanted peace. He wanted us to be a United States of America. He wanted the South to get back to normal as quickly as possible, and he wanted the North to welcome our South people back into the nation. He wanted peace. That was his ultimate goal. The 10th passage is on page 719. No sooner had the presidential party reached the landing than Lincoln was surrounded by a small group of black laborers shouting, "Blessed be the Lord! There is the great Messiah! Glory, hallelujah!" First one and then several others fell on their knees. "Don't kneel to me," Lincoln said, his voice full of emotion. "That is not right. You must kneel to God only and thank him for the liberty you will hereafter enjoy." The men stood up, joined hands, and began to sing a hymn. The streets, which had been entirely deserted, became suddenly alive, with crowds of black people tumbling and shouting from over the hills and from the waterside. This passage brought me a lot of joy because it showed how much joy there was in abolishing slavery and how grateful the people were for making them free. My brain doesn't understand slavery. I can't really wrap around how another person can think that they are higher than another person just based on their skin color. And slavery is something that has just been such a dark time in our country. And the fact that Lincoln was able to abolish it and get rid of it and help our country become more united just makes me that much more proud of him and just excited to meet him and to thank him for all that he did to make us a United States. The 11th passage is on page 744. News of Lincoln's death was withheld from Seward. So with the assassination of Lincoln, they tried to assassinate Seward as well. And he was in bed having suffered an accident from his carriage. He tried to jump from his carriage when the horse basically went bananas and his heel got caught and he hit his head and had so much damage to his face that his face was discolored and it was hard to tell who he was. So he was actually laid up in his bed. So news of Lincoln's death was withheld from Seward. The doctors feared that he could not sustain the shock. On Easter Sunday, however, as he looked out the window toward Lafayette Park, he noticed the War Department flag at half-mast. He gazed a while. Noah Brooks reported. Then, turning to his attendant, he announced, "The president is dead." The attendant tried to deny it, but Seward knew with grim certainty. "If he had been alive, he would have been the first to call on me," he said. "But he has not been here, nor has he sent to know how I am. And there's the flag at half-mast." He lay back on the bed, the great tears coursing down his gashed cheeks, and the dreadful truth sinking into his mind. His good friend, his captain-in-chief, was dead. And along with that, just utter sadness that Seward felt when he realized that Lincoln had passed away is this passage on page 746. It says, "All of Washington was present. Gideon Welles sadly noted, congressmen, senators, justices, diplomats, governors, military officers, the members of the cabinet, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. But Abraham Lincoln was not there. All felt this. None felt that absence more keenly than the members of his cabinet, the remarkable group of rivals whom Lincoln had brought into his official family. They had fiercely opposed one another and often contested their chief on important questions. But, as Seward later remarked, a cabinet which should agree once on every such question would be no better or safer than one counselor. By calling these men to his side, Lincoln had afforded them an opportunity to excuse their talents to the fullest and to share of the labor and the glory of the struggle that would reunite and transform their country and secure their own places in posterity. This passage just again shows how neat it was that Lincoln gathered these former enemies to work together for the better good of the nation. That takes a lot of patience and a lot of strength to be able to work with people who have not been kind to you in the past. And the last section I wanted to share is on page 748. This is Tolstoy's description of Lincoln, and I think it's a very apropos description of him to end with. This little incident proves how largely the name of Lincoln is worshipped throughout the world and how legendary his personality had become. It's a story about some soldiers who wanted to get a picture of Lincoln, and then they found one. And as they were handing it to the soldier to be able to deliver it, his hands just quivered and he just paused for a second. He just had so much respect for Lincoln. So that's the incident he's talking about. Now, why was Lincoln so great that he overshadows all other national heroes? He really was not a great general like Napoleon or Washington. He was not such a skillful statesman as Gladstone or Frederick the Great, but his supremacy expresses itself altogether in his peculiar moral power and in the greatness of his character. Washington was a typical American. Napoleon was a typical Frenchman, but Lincoln was a humanitarian as broad as the world. He was bigger than his country, bigger than all the presidents together. We are still too near to his greatness, Tolstoy concluded, but after a few centuries more, our posterity will find him considerably bigger than we do. His genius is still too strong and too powerful for the common understanding, just as the sun is too hot when its light beams directly on us. I hope you enjoyed this review of Team of Rivals. I absolutely love this book. I love Lincoln, and I'm so excited to meet him, and I'm so proud of his character and his morals and his sense of humor for being able to overcome sadness and just be a light to those around him as he shared stories and anecdotes trying to teach principles. And I am just so grateful that he was the president to be able to gather the Union together and unite us during that absolutely terrible time of the Civil War. Please share in the comments what you love about this book, and if you have any recommendations of other books in this genre. I really enjoy studying the Civil War and the beginnings of our country. I think that it is such a neat topic to study, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you share it with those who you think will appreciate it as well. Happy reading!